Picture this. It's 2 in the morning. You're lying in bed, just staring up at the dark ceiling. You have a fever. Your head is pounding with this dull, heavy ache. Your sinuses are completely blocked, and you have absolutely zero energy. You just feel thoroughly, utterly awful.
Right.
And as you lie there, shivering slightly, your brain starts doing that familiar negotiation. You wonder, if I just keep telling myself, I'm fine, I'm not really that sick, can that actually help me get better? Welcome to TalkKast.
That is such a familiar situation, honestly.
Mm.
And it really exposes how differently people handle the reality of being ill. I mean, when you observe how we talk about sickness, people generally fall into two extreme camps.
I see.
On one side, you have those who dismiss the idea of mindset entirely. They view illness as a purely mechanical, physical event, like an invasion of a virus or bacteria. And they conclude that your mental state is completely irrelevant to the biological reality of the infection.
So that's the strictly biological camp, the idea that a virus doesn't care if you're happy or sad.
Precisely. And then on the far opposite end, you have this massive swing into toxic positivity. These are the people who speak as if happy thoughts can magically eradicate a pathogen.
Oh, wow.
Right? They act like the mind can clear a serious respiratory infection if you just push hard enough and manifest wellness.
Both of those extremes feel incredibly disconnected from reality. I mean, the truth has to be somewhere in the middle. It's probably less dramatic than the idea that your thoughts are actively destroying a virus, but it's also incredibly useful.
Exactly.
What we're really looking at is how your mental state deeply influences the environment in which your body's recovery takes place.
That's a very accurate way to look at it.
Hmm.
To understand that environment, well, we have to first establish the foundational reality of what is happening when you are sick. Illness is a physical event first.
That makes sense.
When you are ill, especially with a respiratory infection like a cold or the flu, you aren't suffering from a motivational problem. You are experiencing a highly active, incredibly demanding immune response.
I want to stop there for a second because we usually view symptoms as the virus attacking us. But all those miserable things we feel, the extreme fatigue, the low appetite, the heavy aches in our joints, those aren't just random annoyances caused by the virus itself.
That's an important distinction. The virus causes damage, yes, but the vast majority of how awful you feel is actually your own immune system working.
Really?
Yes, those symptoms are purposeful biological signals. The fever is your body intentionally raising its core temperature to create an inhospitable environment for the pathogen.
That explains a lot.
And the aches and the profound lethargy, well, they're your body essentially forcing you to slow down so it can redirect its resources toward fighting the infection.
So it's almost like, when my phone hits 5% battery, the screen goes dim, the background apps shut down, and the phone just refuses to do anything non-essential. The body is aggressively prioritizing the core operating system.
That's a perfect analogy.
But I'm stuck on how people react to this. When we feel like we've been hit by a truck, our first instinct, especially in a culture that values constant productivity, is to aggressively motivate ourselves to get up. We try to force our way through it.
Right.
Are we actually just fighting our own biology when we do that?
We absolutely are. It actually connects perfectly to what we talked about in why you feel tired all the time. The body requires an immense amount of energy to run an immune response, which is exactly why the fatigue hits so hard.
I get what you mean.
Generating a fever, producing millions of new white blood cells, and managing systemic inflammation are incredibly energy-demanding processes. When you try to push through that and demand energy for working or exercising, you are literally pulling biological resources away from the very system that is trying to protect you.
I see. But wait, I want to challenge this idea of hope versus denial. Because if I tell myself I'm fine just to get enough adrenaline to feed my kids, answer an urgent work email, and essentially survive the day, isn't that a necessary biological hack? I mean, why do we label that as harmful denial?
That's a very fair pushback. There is a difference between a momentary necessity and an ongoing strategy. When you use that adrenaline to push through a critical moment, you are borrowing energy from your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response.
That sounds familiar.
That adrenaline masks the symptoms temporarily, which feels like a win. But it's a short-term loan with an extremely high interest rate.
Tell me more about that interest rate. What is the physical cost of that denial?
The cost is that adrenaline and cortisol, the primary stress hormones, actively suppress your immune system. If you stay in that state of denial, acting as if you aren't sick, you keep your body in a stressed, high-alert state.
That makes perfect sense.
And that delays recovery, prolongs the physiological stress, and ensures that when the adrenaline finally wears off, the crash is significantly harder. Plus, when people practice this kind of denial, they usually end up out in public, spreading germs to everyone else.
That's very true. People often use the exact same words to mean completely different things. Take the phrase, "I'm fine." It sounds like there are two entirely different versions of that statement.
There are. In the first version, the coping version, I'm fine, means I am sick, but I'm calm, I am safe, and I am resting. I will get through this.
Right.
It's an acceptance of the physical reality without adding panic to it. The second version is pure denial. I'm fine, meaning I refuse to stop. I am ignoring these symptoms and proceeding as normal.
You see this constantly with high achievers, people who treat illness as a test of character. They drag themselves to the office or they sit in bed shivering while powering through spreadsheets, and they think they're demonstrating resilience.
But it's not resilience. Resilience is adapting to a challenge. What they are doing is refusal.
Refusal.
Yes, it's a refusal to adapt to their current physiological reality. We have this pervasive cultural idea that rest is laziness. But during an active infection, rest isn't laziness. Rest is cooperation.
Rest is cooperation. I like that. You're teaming up with your immune system instead of working against it. But I want to dig into the actual biology of this. If the brain and the immune system are communicating, what is the actual physical bridge between a thought in my head and an immune cell in my bloodstream? Because they feel like completely separate systems.
They aren't separate at all. There is an entire field called psychoneuroimmunology that studies this exact relationship. To understand the physical bridge, we have to look at the nervous system and the endocrine system.
Oh, heck, go on.
When you have a thought of panic, say you're lying in bed worrying about falling behind at work, your hypothalamus detects that psychological threat.
Even though the threat isn't a physical predator, the brain treats it like one.
Exactly. The brain doesn't distinguish between the stress of a looming deadline and the stress of a physical attack. The hypothalamus sends a signal to your adrenal glands, which pump out cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream. And here's where the bridge happens. Your white blood cells, the very cells fighting the virus, actually have receptors for cortisol.
I hadn't thought of it that way. So the stress hormone literally binds to the immune cells.
Yes. And when cortisol binds to those cells, it essentially tells them to stand down. It suppresses their ability to produce inflammatory proteins and fight the infection. The body's essentially saying, we have an immediate emergency to survive right now. We can't afford to spend energy fighting a cold.
That explains a lot. So the mind is literally shifting the chemical environment that the immune system has to work in. It's almost like we're adding a second illness on top of the physical one.
That's a good point.
We have the biological infection, which is the first illness, and then we create this second illness made entirely of panic, frustration, and chronic stress. We lie there thinking, this is unbearable, or I am never going to get better.
The second illness is a highly accurate way to frame it. And the physical impact of that second illness is immediate and measurable. Take breathlessness, for example, which is a common and frightening symptom in severe respiratory infections.
That happens to a lot of people.
The physical sensation of struggling to breathe is distressing. But if you add panic to that sensation, you directly exacerbate the physical distress.
Because the panic changes your breathing mechanics.
Right. When you panic, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. Your heart rate increases, your oxygen demand spikes, and your breathing naturally becomes faster and shallower. You are now physically starving yourself of oxygen because of a mental state, making the original symptom significantly worse.
So calming the mind doesn't remove the underlying infection in your lungs, but it contains the experience. It stops the cycle of panic from escalating the physical distress.
Exactly. It prevents the second illness from amplifying the first. We see a similar mechanism with placebo-like effects.
I'm glad you brought that up because the placebo effect is widely misunderstood. How does it actually fit in here? Is it just positive thinking magically healing the body?
Not at all. The placebo effect doesn't mean the illness is imaginary. And it certainly doesn't mean your mind is neutralizing a virus. What it shows us is that feeling cared for, feeling safe, and trusting in a recovery process physically alters the pain perception pathways in your nervous system.
That's interesting.
When your brain believes you are safe, it reduces the volume of the pain signals.
I get what you mean. There is a massive difference between experiencing severe symptoms and feeling emotionally flattened by them. You can be in intense physical discomfort without suffering the mental anguish of thinking the discomfort is a catastrophe.
That is the core of it. Two people can have the exact same viral load, the exact same temperature, and the exact same physical symptoms, but their experience of the illness will be completely different based on that mental layer.
Which naturally leads us to how the body actually enforces this need for recovery, because if the immune system is so energy demanding, it has to have a way to shut our consciousness down to conserve power, and that mechanism is sleep, right?
Yes,
During an illness, sleep feels less like a luxury and more like core infrastructure.
it is the ultimate biological infrastructure for recovery. Sleep and immunity are deeply interconnected at a mechanical level. When you enter deep, slow-wave sleep, your immune system ramps up its activity. Your body starts producing and releasing specific proteins called cytokines.
What exactly do cytokines do?
They are essentially chemical messengers. They orchestrate the immune response. Some of them promote inflammation to trap the pathogen, while others direct white blood cells to the site of the infection.
I see.
The production of these vital proteins peaks during sleep because your body isn't wasting energy on movement, digestion, or cognitive tasks. If you aren't sleeping, you are depriving your immune system of the very tools it needs to function.
And this is where that calmer mindset becomes absolutely critical, because if you are trapped in that second illness of panic, you literally cannot sleep. We've all experienced that terrible 3 in the morning anxiety loop. You wake up feeling hot, you check your temperature, you start calculating how many hours of work you've missed, and suddenly your heart is racing. You are exhausted, but your nervous system is completely wired.
That is a destructive loop to be caught in. Your brain is signaling a threat, which floods your system with cortisol, pulling you right out of the parasympathetic rest and digest state that you need for sleep.
Right.
A calmer mindset is the only thing that interrupts that loop. It's not about aggressively denying the discomfort, but rather choosing not to add anxiety to the discomfort.
So what does healthy internal language actually sound like in that moment? Because as we established earlier, lying there repeating, "I'm not sick, I'm fine," is just denial.
Healthy self-talk is grounded in physical reality. It sounds like my body's working incredibly hard right now, and I am helping it. I don't need to tackle my inbox today. Today's job is fluids, rest, and patience.
That takes so much pressure off. It completely redefines what productivity means for that specific day. Being productive today means drinking water, staring at the wall, and letting your immune system work.
It acknowledges the illness without turning it into a crisis. When you use that kind of language, you are physically signaling to your nervous system that you are safe. That allows the sympathetic nervous system to stand down, which lets your body settle into that slow-wave sleep to produce those cytokines.
That's a useful way to look at it. But I do want to push back again because we need to draw a very firm line here. Mindset is powerful for shaping the environment of recovery, but it obviously has limits. Where is the line between staying calm and dangerously ignoring a real medical problem? Because we see people sometimes use mindset to justify avoiding doctors entirely.
That is a highly dangerous territory, and it's where wellness philosophies can become actively harmful. Mindset cannot replace biological necessities. You cannot think your way out of severe dehydration.
Yeah.
A calm attitude does not replace the need for oxygen, and it certainly does not replace antiviral medications for people in high-risk categories or timely medical intervention.
So what are the actual boundaries? How do we reality test our own symptoms?
The boundary is drawn by objective red flags. If you are experiencing progressively worsening symptoms, severe shortness of breath, persistent chest pain, or sudden confusion, well, that is no longer a situation you manage with a calm mental state. Those are physiological signs that your immune system is failing to manage the infection on its own.
Right. At that point, practicing calm self-talk in your bedroom is the absolute wrong tool for the job.
Exactly. True resilience involves knowing when self-care is sufficient and when it is completely inadequate. You have to monitor your physical baseline objectively. If you are struggling to draw a breath, you need professional medical intervention, not positive thinking.
That's an essential boundary. And there's another boundary regarding how we interact with the rest of the world. Just because you feel mentally better or emotionally stronger doesn't mean you are suddenly no longer contagious.
That's a very common and very frustrating trap. Someone rests for a day, practices good self-talk, and wakes up feeling emotionally optimistic. They decide they are tired of being cooped up and feel ready to get back out there. But the biological reality of virus shedding does not care about your optimism.
You can't outthink a virus's contagiousness.
You really can't. The general medical consensus is that you need to be fever-free for at least 24 hours without the use of fever-reducing medications before you should even consider that your highly contagious period is ending.
That makes perfect sense.
And even then, caution is required. Your mental state might feel fully recovered, but your cells are still actively clearing the pathogen. Going back to the office or a social event just because you feel positive is exactly how outbreaks happen.
And that brings us right back to the difference between true coping and denial. The person practicing denial uses their positive thinking as an excuse to ignore public health guidelines and their own physical limits. The person practicing true coping uses their positive thinking to endure the necessary isolation and rest.
That's the perfect distinction. Healthy positive thinking is completely aligned with reality. It supports the physical requirements of recovery rather than attempting to bypass them.
So, if we look at the whole picture, the narrative we started with that positive thinking is either completely useless or magically effective is entirely wrong. Positive thinking doesn't instantly resolve an infection. It doesn't vaporize a pathogen, but it fundamentally changes the climate of your recovery.
It alters the context and the physiological environment in which your immune system operates.
Yes, it reduces the unnecessary stress load, it prevents that second illness of panic from taking root, it makes the physical symptoms feel less crushing, and crucially, it allows your nervous system to accept the rest your body is desperately demanding. You don't have to force fake positivity, and you don't have to pretend to be stronger than your own biology.
And if we step back and look at the bigger picture, it makes you wonder, if our internal monologue and our stress levels can so fundamentally shift our biological recovery from something as simple as a common respiratory infection, how might our day-to-day cultural obsession with hustle culture be permanently altering our baseline immunity? Are we walking around with chronically suppressed immune systems simply because we've normalized constant grinding stress as a way of life?
Thanks for listening to TalkKast.